Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Maravilius America First show, and now your host, Ted Maravilius.
Thank you, Andy Flathers, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the inaugural show of the Ted Maravilius America First Hour. I'm your host, Ted Maravilius, and let's get right into it. Later on in the show, we're going to have Dr. Blumenfeld, who has appeared on Crossfire, and he's going to be talking about issues such as outcome-based education and education in general, including whole language, as well as the Look-Say method. In addition to that, what we're going to do in our first show is lay out the actual format of what's going to take place in successive shows. To begin with, you'll see me, and I will do a little bit of an introduction as to what the theme of the show will be. And then what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of a review of the news, my astute commentary on the happenings that you may not be reading about in the papers, or if you do, you might be getting a liberal bias towards that. I think you will be exposed to another set of opinions that you will not see unless you take a look at the Rush Limbaugh show, which is on at 12 o'clock midnight, Channel 15 here in Danvers, Fox Network. I do recommend you folks out there to watch his show. It is the Rush Limbaugh show at School for Advanced Conservative Studies, but I suppose that this could be the Ted Maravilius School for Beginning Conservative Studies. And with that prelude, let me explain a little bit about myself. If you can't tell, I'm nervous. And I'm a class of 1987 graduate from Danvers High School. I successfully graduated from UMass Amherst in 1991 with a BA in Political Science. And of course, just recently I ran for political office, state representative. And albeit unsuccessfully, it was a learning experience. And the whole purpose of the show is to be a vehicle for learning and for the dissemination of knowledge, which is not getting out there, not at least in a prevalent manner. To begin with, why America first? Well, let me quote George Washington, and this is really the premise of my political thinking. Forgive the old English. "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." See, that is basically the core doctrine of America First. We need to protect American interests first, and in doing so, we will help out everybody at the same time. Because a strong America is a free America, and a free America is the best America to help others internally and externally. America First also comprises the thinking and the ideology that the Constitution of the United States was the best form of government that the world has ever known, and has given us the maximum amount of freedom in a set of ordered liberties, okay? And this is what we need to get back to if we're going to attain that freedom, if we're going to retake that prosperity that this country used to be involved with, used to be actively getting the American dream. It was not hard before as it is right now. Right now it's getting more and more difficult to make a living. The two-worker the two-worker families must go out into society and work just to make a living. They have to get by, i.e. the woman has to go, even if they have a couple of children, they have to give the children to child care workers while the wife goes out to work. And I just think that that's, it's a little bit unfortunate that the wives can't spend more time with their children. That's all because of the tax policies. And the tax policies are predicated on the amount of government that we have. We have to pay for the government that we do have. So this concept of America First is about retaking our government, downsizing it, freeing people up, giving them the choice whether they want to work, not making it a necessity. And that is what freedom. Freedom is the ability to choose what you want to do with your lives. And if you have to work just to pay 50% of your income just to the state, federal, and local governments in terms of taxes, you don't really have a lot of freedom. And I don't think it's by mistake. I think it's because we do have to pay what we have here before us today, and that is an excessive government. And so that's a little bit of what the America First philosophy is all about. I'd like to get into more specifics in the issue at hand today, which is outcome-based education. And before I do that, I just wanted to introduce my good friend Jim Morose. And Jim will be giving his astute commentaries on meanings, taking substance, and giving the real true meaning and definitions of words. Attaching meaning to words is what Jim Morose's segment will be about in successive and future shows. As Rush Limbaugh likes to say, and I agree, liberals are truly symbolism over substance. And we need to show, we need to make the case that that is indeed what is happening. We're being told a lot of cliches, but we're not necessarily attaching meaning to those cliches. And I think the best way to start attaching meaning to these cliches is to take a look at a local one, and that's called outcome-based education. And I just would like to read to you a memo that I received as a substitute teacher for Danvers High School a couple of years back. And I was quite shocked. I didn't know anything about outcome-based education. And when I read the memo, I was very curious that this could happen in so-called, you know, conservative Danvers. You see, ladies and gentlemen, outcome-based education is a prescribed set of goals that a student must attain and must demonstrate in order to graduate. And what are these goals? Is it reading, writing, and arithmetic? No, it's not really that. What it is this, and I quote verbatim, Superintendent Sanasanios, Superintendent's Update, May 30th, 1991, and these are his goals that he wrote. A student must exhibit cultural awareness and understanding, is aware of a diversity of languages, customs, beliefs, and institutions. Beliefs, i.e., if you believe that your beliefs, your way of thinking, your religion is the right way, well, that you're not with OBE. You are somehow closed-minded. You are intolerant of others. You are somehow not politically correct. I mean, that's the best way to say it. And ladies and gentlemen, the schools should not be a breeding ground for politically correct young skulls of mush. I'm sorry, but they should be for learning the traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic. They need to understand the basics. They don't need to be politicized, and they don't need to be taught that Heather should have two mummies or Daddy has a roommate. And that's exactly what's going to be coming to Danvers, that this whacked out left-wing ideology that will be incorporated into a system called outcome-based education. And I think you need to know that. And let me just read you a few other excerpts before we go to our next segment. Section E, personal social management. Mind you, your daughters and your sons will have to know this in order to graduate. Realizes that what is considered normal is relative. That means if you tell Johnny, your son, that it is wrong to engage in sodomy, and he goes to school and says, well, my mother told me that it was wrong to engage in sodomy, you can't graduate. You can't graduate, and that's not good. You pay for the school system here in Danvers with the property tax. Not only is it your money, but it's your kid. How would you like the superintendent to say that your kid has to act a certain way, has to believe a certain way in his political beliefs? I don't think that that's right. And to further bolster my case, in case you think I'm overstating it, the superintendent wrote, accepts people despite differences in lifestyle. See, that's a key word, lifestyle. That's just a buzzword for homosexuality. And I know this because I've seen it at UMass Amherst. This is happening all across the country, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen. It's happening in the state of Pennsylvania, where many fine groups such as Citizens for Excellence in Education, Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition, and even Governor Casey, a pro-life Democrat, pro-family Democrat, is opposing this actively. It's not just myself. This is just the first time you've heard of this in Danvers or in the area of Massachusetts. But it's coming to a town near you, even outside of Danvers. And we need to assess this. We have to see what this is. And we have to say to ourselves, do we want it? Do we want it? With illiteracy going up, with education really, really going down, do we need to take 2 steps backwards? I say no. I think we need to get back to the fundamentals. Since 1963, when prayer and Bible were banned by the Supreme Court, illiteracy has skyrocketed up to 250%. Teenage pregnancies, sexual transmitted diseases have just been skyrocketing ever since that time. what this outcome-based education does is substitute a valueless education to a progressive inculcation of a human secular religion, meaning it's bad enough right now where we're not teaching them right and wrong through Judeo-Christian values, okay? But we're going to take it one step further and actually say you must believe this. You must be a liberal. You must be PC, politically correct. You know, just like what Donna Shalala, the Health and Human Services Secretary in the Clinton administration wants. And I just think that that's very unfortunate, and that's why we're going to have Dr. Blumenfeld on the show a little bit later to give us his feelings as an educator on that subject and what we can do about it. I sort of did not get into my review of the news, and I went right into OBE because basically I only had one little thing I wanted to say in the news, because I wanted to concentrate as much as I can on outcome-based education and its parent, and that is the Educational Reform Bill, which is being passed right now as we speak. And this little tidbit in the news I want to read to you. This was in the Boston Globe, dated March 14th, 1993, and it basically had a listing of the House members, the congressmen, and how they voted on House Bill number, well, it does not give a bill number, but it's the fetal tissue research bill that came up in the House. The final vote was 253 for, 173 against, i.e. it did pass, and the bill read, the House approved amendment to advance fetal tissue research to combat diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Basically what it was a vote to sponsor federally utilized fetal tissue research. And no one in the Massachusetts congressional delegation voted to oppose using fetal tissue for research other than that great American, Congressman Peter Blute from Worcester or Shrewsbury, same district, voting yes for the extracting of brain tissue from live human beings, live babies. It's done live. Was Peter Torkelson, the Republican congressman from Danvers, and I just thought you might want to know about it. I also wanted to read to you an article that I believe either appeared in the Danvers Herald or the North Shore Sunday, but they're basically owned by the same company, and I was very surprised that it was in the media, and my hat's off to whoever was responsible for this. It's by Richard Gaines, and he's commenting on this new educational reform bill, which it reads just like the outcome-based education that I've been trying to tell you about. Richard Gaines states this: what is a more important subject for public school students to study? The history of the Commonwealth or the cultural and ethnic diversity of the Commonwealth? Answer: if you answered A, you're an old-fashioned, fuddy-duddy, out of step with these politically correct times, and might be laboring latent insensitivities that could be relieved with therapy. Now, the correct answer was B, the cultural and ethnic diversity of the Commonwealth. Well, although the Educational Reform Bill doesn't have much to say about education per se, not too surprisingly, the 113 pages it does take up establishes minimum local spending levels, authorizing approximately 24 advisory committees, and setting up state spending goals. Ladies and gentlemen, the Education Reform Bill is nothing more than a massive tax on you, probably a destruction of Proposition 2.5, and definitely the taking away of local control over education, the school committees, and you as a parent. Mr. Gaines goes on to say, one of those core subjects that this bill would mandate would be cultural and ethnic diversity and the contributions made by diverse and cultural ethnic groups to the history and livelihood of Massachusetts. The Board of Education may, at its discretion, add at least a basic knowledge of the history of the Commonwealth. I mean, they might add a little good into this really ridiculous piece of legislation. And Richard Gaines says, where we're heading here, whatever the intention of the drafters, is a generation of future citizens who, if they don't have a clue as to how we came to be the society we are, will at least have a detailed appreciation of rich and varied contributions to a nebulous heritage, i.e. the concept of America First, the Constitution, everything that we value here as American institutions, they're not going to be taught. And Richard Gaines concludes by saying, it almost sounds like indoctrination, not education. Pencils down, the time for thinking is up. And ladies and gentlemen, I think it says what I'm trying to say, and that is to say that education should not be politicized. It should not be a breeding ground for little left-wingers. And at the very least, it should not be mandated and controlled by the state government. It needs to be a function of the locality. And you as a parent need to have control over that. If the educational reform bill gets through, you will have zero control, and you can just forget about the public schools. At this point, I'm not ready to give up. My future guest, the guest that will be appearing on my show right now, Dr. Blumenfeld, is, but he is willing to just give up the public schools. But I'll tell you what, there will be no question we'll have to if this House number 1000 gets through. It's the educational reform bill. Let me just read you some of the highlights. This bill would require a board to establish advisory councils on life management skills. You out there, your parents 30, 40, 50, did you ever learn about life management skills? I mean, did you ever hear that word? How about racial imbalance? I mean, all of this stuff, what is this coming to? I mean, I don't see anything here about mathematics. I don't really see anything here about reading per se. I see all these little political terminologies thrown in here, and I think that unfortunately, that's what they're probably going to be concentrating on. Said instruments shall take in consideration the cultural diversity of students. What about born-again Christians, fundamentalists who believe that homosexuality is wrong, or that there's a decency that we should try to attain in a local community, that there should be some minimal rights and wrongs? No, that's not the diversity that they're talking about. See, that type of diversity excludes those who believe in the Christian religion. And I don't think that that's right. I think that's a violation of the freedom of religion clause of the First Amendment. And there's another side that you need to understand about this educational reform bill. This bill would label chronically underperforming those communities that they just basically don't feel is up to par in implementing their politically correct policies. And if, say, the Danvers was not brainwashing their kids at a faster rate, or at a rate that would accommodate the state of Massachusetts, then what would happen is the principal could be removed, okay, and an actual, I'm trying to think of the term that they used here, a receiver would be placed upon the town of Danvers, i.e. the Danvers High School would be controlled by a receiver appointed by the state. Now, what is a receiver? You've got to understand that terms and words have meaning. A receiver means a dictator. He comes from out of town. His sole raison d'etre, reason of being, is to implement the state's politically correct policies because apparently, say, for instance, in this hypothetical situation, Danvers is not implementing their cultural diversity at a fast enough rate. It may not come to this quickly, but it'll happen. Maybe the town of Danvers will implement it at a rate, this politically correct nonsense, at a rate that will satisfy the state. Either way, the children lose, we as a community lose, and not only do we lose morally and economically because we're going to have a very unskilled and illiterate workforce as a result of this, but we'll also lose because we're going to lose freedom to have the autonomy over education, over educating our sons and daughters, and that is dangerous. Abraham Lincoln once said that what is taught in the classroom in one generation becomes the political philosophy of the next. And it's bad enough when we have now the notion and understanding of our Constitution, of our traditions of Western society have been all but completely attacked by educational establishments such as the National Education Association, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and unless we put on the brakes on stuff like this educational reform bill, unless we stop outcome-based education, which basically says that you have to believe that homosexuality is a legitimate lifestyle in order to graduate. If we don't stop that, then we're just going to devolve into a dictatorship. And that's the end of a morally decaying society. It happened to the Romans, it happened to the Persians, et al., ad infinitum. And I think that's unfortunate, and I wanted you to know this before you went and you voted in the next town elections. Do your research. Just find out what outcome-based education is. Ask them. I sent the superintendent this memo. I sent all the school committee members this memo. Hopefully they still have it. Go to your school committee member and ask them, hey, what about this memo? What about this outcome-based education? Why is the governor of Pennsylvania opposing it? Why? And why does it have incorporated into it stuff like appreciates the concept of global interdependence? That means if you believe in the independence of the United States of America and that we should be free and sovereign and make up our own rules as our congressmen see fit, as the people see fit, then we're somehow, backwards if we believe in this, and that we ought to accept the United Nations, which was founded by a communist named Alger Hiss, as the government of the United States of America. Should we really accept this? I say no. This is absolutely nonsense, and this is what the superintendent will basically implement in your child's education if this is going to be passed. Now, OB has been passed. I believe it's in its third year of implementation. It's a 5-year plan, very similar to the Soviet 5-year economic plans. And I think it's time that we put on the brakes of OBE. I think at the very least we should have more knowledge of it. They're ramming this through using these code words such as what is normal is relative, lifestyle. Other words like outcomes are determined by teacher. That is to say, it's completely relevant. It's not an objective standard. Like, 2 + 2 = 4. With OBE, 2 + 2 = 5 if the teacher wants it to equal 5. And it's just that simple, and it's just that dangerous. And I think that's unfortunate. Well, I've rambled on long enough. I did want to quote a few more quotes from an excellent article by Larry and Susan Caseman entitled Taking Charge. This was from the Home Education magazine. And I think a couple of paragraphs will say much better what I've been trying to say, and that is to say that OBE is very dangerous. Here's a quote. How would you, as a homeschooler, like to have the government set goals for your children's intellectual, social, emotional, and moral development, and then decide whether your children's development in these areas was satisfactory? Incidentally, not only does this paragraph in this article apply to homeschoolers, it also applies to parents, okay, who have sons and daughters in the public school system. OBE would be changing compulsory attendance laws to compulsory education laws. You have to go to school right now, the way the laws are set up. But you would have to learn. You would have to mouth these politically correct terminologies in order to graduate. And this is unprecedented. This never happened before. This increase in government control can only happen if the people do not object, since there's no basis in the U.S. Constitution or even state constitutions for such state control of the American people. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not just about educational reform. What this is changing attitudes, not education, but attitudes and thinking habits of students. I quote, we are seriously considering requiring that young people have certain attitudes before they can graduate and receive that diploma. I want you to think about that. Once you go down to the local bookstore or video store and rent 1984 by George Orwell and see what happens when you have the government be in control of your attitude. That's dangerous, that's totalitarian, and that's antithetical to freedom and to your control. And the funny thing is, you have to pay for that tyranny by, with your tax dollars. I say, no way. That's ridiculous. Again, the governor of Pennsylvania opposes this. A lot of concerned parents oppose this, both Christian and non-Christian. And just let me say a few other things from this article, which I think is just absolutely amazing. When you read this, it's absolutely amazing to see how far along we are across the country with this outcome-based education system. The consolidation of power takes longer than installing a dictator. That is, the implementing of OBE takes a little bit longer than just declaring martial law. But it can have more permanent and debilitating effects. In fact, we can still have 4th of July parades and fireworks celebrating our independence, and the Constitution will still state that we have our freedoms if this is still implemented. It's not necessarily declaring the U.S. Constitution null and void, but in practice, the people will be following state-certified curriculum and taking state-certified assessments and preparing for state-certified skill assessments geared to state-certified jobs, and all driven by state-certified outcomes that fulfill the state goals in education. People would not assemble to speak their minds because they would have been conditioned to accept the judgment of the state as their own. In other words, freedom of religion would be practiced only by those willing to cut themselves off from the dominant culture, since there would be no support or jobs for those who do not practice the state religion of material wealth, who do not bow down to the altar of political correctness. And I would like to conclude by saying that historically, education has been a function of the locality. The word education does not appear in the U.S. Constitution explicitly, and the 10th Amendment explicitly states that anything that is not stated in the Constitution, all rights and powers, are reserved to the states and the people respectively. This term education is something that has historically been in the purview of localities, towns, and the local citizenry. There are a lot of states that do mandate state curriculum. I think it's terrible. But with the educational reform bill, that's exactly what we'll get. We'll have state-mandated curriculum, including a lot of this politically correct stuff, such as Project 10, which mandates, with taxpayers' money, around $200,000 worth of money, homosexuals coming into each and every high school, converting your children to be homosexuals. I mean, I don't think that's a good use of our taxpayers' money. I don't think that that's really something that we want our locality to be beholden to. Do you know something? If a locality, if the town of Danvers wanted to do so, if they wanted to pass a law bringing in homosexuals, fine. At least it would be a decision of the locality and we could have some control over it. But with this educational reform bill, we're not going to have any control. We're going to be completely beholden to the state, and we're going to also have to pay for it as well. This is mandatory payment schedules that is incorporated into the educational reform bill, and this is mandated curriculum. And I'd like to conclude by using the superintendent's own words. And this was, and I quote this, in the Pacesetter, a newsletter published by parents and administrators communicating for education. I don't think it gives a date, but it's fairly recently. And on page 2, actually, let's see here. I know what I'm doing. Okay, on the front page, Superintendent Sanasanu says this: Goal 4 of outcome-based education, to increase awareness of diversity in American society by emphasizing multicultural values as highlighted in our mission statement. To accomplish this, particular attention will be focused on adopting new textbooks that highlight cultural diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, multicultural values, that means if you have a value system that states that, hey, there is a right and a wrong, and that's just the way it is, then you're going to be labeled intolerant because it goes against the whims of the multicultural ethic, which anything goes. Everything is relative, like I referred to before. Particular attention will be focused on adopting new textbooks. I don't know if you ever heard of the book called Heather Has Two Mummies or Daddy Has a Roommate, but these are the type of weirdo, wacko books that are going to be coming to a school system near you if these words from the superintendent of the schools here is implemented. And I'm not saying that he's not sincere in what he's doing, but I do believe he's sincerely wrong. And I think that when you start accentuating diversity and differences and stuff that brings us further apart, then I think you're going against the grain of what this country was founded upon, and that was e pluribus unum. You can take a look at your dollar bill, say that from many, one. This is a melting pot where we come together under the bonds of the Constitution, which gives us the liberties and the freedoms that we all enjoy, and to downplay that and to water it down by emphasizing other cultures and actually making us accept other people's values, then what you're going to do is you're going to lose respect for people. You're going to lose the value system that we had. You're going to lose your system of government. It'll be turned into a socialistic type government. And you're going to lose the control of your children because they're going to be adopting new textbooks which highlight cultural diversity. George Washington is thrown out. Karl Marx is put back in. I don't think that that's right. I really don't, and it alarms me. It should alarm some of you out there. I hope it does. I'd like to conclude this section by saying, get involved, especially if you have a son or daughter in the Danvers High School system or the Danvers school system, and know that they're trying to use your sons and daughters as little pawns in their political games, and I say let's say no to that. And in our next section, we will be again meeting with Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who has appeared in many magazines and has also appeared on the Crossfire Show and many other television shows. He's a foremost leader in the educational system, that is to say the home educational system and the private school advocacy system that is out there right now. And I hope that you will enjoy what he has to say. And thank you very much for tuning in this segment, and we look forward to seeing you in our next segment. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back here with a special guest, and this, the inaugural guest on the Ted Maravillas America First show, Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld. Thank you for coming. Dr. Blumenfeld has been a leader in the area of education. Dr. Medford Evans once said of Samuel Blumenfeld, one of the 3 best writers in this country on the subject of public education. He wrote a book called NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education, an excellent book, and I do recommend it. And essentially, Dr. Blumenfeld has traveled the country warning people of the ills of and the excesses of public education. And in his book, Is Public Education Necessary?, he deals with the contemporary problems that we see and that we're dealing here today with the issue of outcome-based education. Dr. Blumenfeld was born and educated in New York City, graduated from the City College of New York in 1950, and worked for 10 years in the New York book publishing industry. And now he's, I assume you're working full-time, just...
Writing.
Okay, writing.
Writing. And,
okay, excellent. Well, Dr. Blumenfeld, if you produce more books like these, I'll tell you, the truth will definitely get out. Wow. And I do thank you for being here. I couldn't think of a better guest to have, even despite the fact that this is just an educational-oriented program for this, the inaugural show of the Ted Maravillas America First show. So tell me about yourself, and tell me about the topic that we're discussing today, outcome-based education, and where does your work in this writing, your writings come into play?
Well, first, Ted, I want to thank you for inviting me on your show to be your first guest. It's an honor. Well, I've been writing on education for over 20 years now, and I've been a critic of public education because I got into this business because I was concerned about the reading problem way back in the 1960s when I was an editor at Gross & Dunlap in New York and became aware of the reading problem. And so I've written books on this whole question. I wrote a book entitled The New Illiterates, which brought the reading problem up to date. As you know, Dr. Rudolph Flesch's book, Why Johnny Can't Read, was published back in 1955. So The New Illiterates was published in 1972. And then I wrote a book entitled Is Public Education Necessary? And this was a history. I did research on the origins of our government school system, why the government got involved in education in this country, and why did the American people give government the responsibility for education when it had been a family and a church and a private affair. It's a very interesting history because it has a lot to do with what happened here in New England, because it all started here. I'm sure you know that.
Well, let me interrupt you. Isn't
Yeah.
it true that Harvard University, Princeton, Yale, all the major universities on the East Coast were started by dedicated Christians and
Oh,
pastors?
absolutely. All of the universities. Harvard was founded by Calvinists, and the Unitarians took it over in 1808, and that changed the whole direction, because Unitarianism is really the origin of American political liberalism, because Unitarians put all of their, you might say, their good works in social betterment, in social activities, in politics, and that's why liberal politics really evolved out of Unitarianism. Another important book that I wrote is called How to Tutor, because it's one thing to be critical of what the public schools are doing, but it's another thing to give parents the tool to do it, to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic correctly. And I'm very critical of the way the schools teach reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Right.
And so so if there are any of your viewers out there who want to actually teach their children the 3 R's at home, this book will do it. It makes it very easy. It's not at all as complex as people think it is. And then, of course, I wrote Alpha Phonics, which is a manual which permits you to tutor any child in reading our alphabetic system.
Can I ask you when you came out with that?
Yes, this came out in '84.
Isn't it funny now, the big craze is hooked on phonics.
Yes,
It looks
yes.
like someone's paying attention. I don't know the quality of the program.
Well, this is much cheaper than Hooked
Yeah.
on Phonics. Hooked on
Yeah.
Phonics is over $200, and this is about, this will come to about $27 now. I think the price has been rising. It was $25.
You
but
have
I
a
think my
newsletter too,
publisher-
right?
Yeah, and then I have a newsletter, the Blumenfeld Education Letter, which is a monthly newsletter in which I take up all of the pertinent aspects and issues of education. For example,
Let's roll that up for the
yeah,
camera. Take
I'm
a
sure.
shot of that.
The particularly outcome-based education, which is now the big thing. As a matter of fact, what surprises me is that there's a big reform bill going through the Massachusetts legislature at this very moment, and nobody knows what's in it.
It's right here. I
Nobody
got
knows.
it.
Do you have a copy
I'll
of
tell
it?
you what. And,
Is that a copy of the
it's
bill
a,
itself?
It's a
or
copy. It's a verbatim copy. It is absolutely incredible. I actually I highlighted the pertinent parts.
But people have not been informed
No.
about this, you see. Now, I'll bet there's a lot of OBE in this particular...
It reads like a book. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all interrelated, and it's happening at the same time. It happens, you know.
But you see, they do all of this by stealth. This is going on all over the country, Ted. OBE, outcome-based education, is the most revolutionary reform of education in this country since its founding, since the beginning. I mean, this is a true revolution almost in the Leninist sense, where they're going to overturn everything and do things so completely differently that people will not realize what's happened until it happens. For example, they have a prenatal component in outcome-based education. Now they're going to be monitoring pregnancies. So the minute you're pregnant, they're interested in your child's education, you see, because they want to make sure that you do the right thing by your child, because they assume that the reason why children aren't learning in our schools is because something that the mother did, you see, or that the mother didn't do. What they ignore is the reason why kids are not learning in our schools is because the schools aren't teaching, and they're using methods that create learning disabilities. They use methods of teaching reading that create dyslexia.
Well, can I throw a statistic at you?
Sure, go ahead.
Since 1963, I was reading an excellent book called The Myth of Separation by David Barton, The Wall Builders.
Yeah.
He makes a contention since 1963, when prayer was outlawed by Earl Warren in the Supreme Court, that illiteracy has gone up by 250%.
Oh, sure.
And that actually, at the time of the founding of this country, when we did have, privatized or very local-oriented
Yes.
education with Christian values, that illiteracy is almost unheard of. Is that
I know.
true?
Oh, yes, that's absolutely true, because you see, this nation was founded on biblical principles, and so you had to know how to read the Bible. This was a very religious-oriented country, and as you know, here in New England, for example, the Calvinists were very strong on education because they realized that you could not sustain a civilization in the wilderness unless those children could read the Bible. And so they were very, very adamant about making sure that the children learn to read correctly. And so we have very high literacy in this country. As a matter of fact, the revolution would have never taken place without high literacy, because it was all done by books and pamphlets and letters. You've heard of the committees of correspondence.
Samuel Adams?
Sure, all of these people. So our literacy, our rate of literacy now is far below what it was years ago, far below. And I can attest to that because I'm old enough to have seen the difference and have seen the decline. For example, I have friends who have taught in the education system now and who are ready to retire. And they relate to me how literacy has deteriorated among young people. Like the literacy of today's students can nowhere compare to the literacy of, say, my generation, because we were all taught to read in the correct manner, in the phonetic manner, in the phonics, the alphabetic phonics way. You see, we became accurate phonetic readers, but today they teach children to read English as if it were Chinese, Ted. As
You
if
mean
it
the
were,
whole language?
Yes, whole language, but also before that, the Dick and Jane.
Oh, look-see method.
Yes, the look-say method, yes.
Oh, okay. Along those lines, I just wanted to publicize an article that Dr. Blumenfeld wrote in the New American, and this is an excellent conservative magazine. And this particular edition was the August 10th, 1992, and Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld did an excellent job in describing some of what you're talking about right now.
Yes. Now, what is that number again?
That's 1-800-JBS-USA1.
Oh,
And it is a toll-free call.
that's easy enough to remember.
Well, that's right, especially for those who have graduated from this look-see whole language methodology in the school system.
Yes.
But in our limited time, why don't you show us your actual latest newsletter, which ironically enough is on outcome-based education?
Yes, well, I wrote this particular newsletter on outcome-based education because when I was in North Carolina recently, the issue came up. And so I was given a lot of materials on the subject, and I knew that something was going on because my publisher has been getting calls from all over the country from parents who are concerned about OBE and want to know something about it. And so I decided to do this newsletter on outcome-based education to inform the public what is happening. And what they are basically doing is scrapping every last vestige of traditional education and creating an entirely new system based on outcomes. In other words, they're going to decide what you should be, and then they're going to work backwards and tailor-make it so that you will be exactly what they think you should be. You see, in other words, when in our free society we get an education, and then we decide what we want to be. We decide what we want to know.
You mean freedom?
Decide, yes. You've heard of freedom?
No,
We don't,
they never taught me that.
right, but now this new system is they are going to decide what you're going to be. And they are going to have two tracks. They are going to, they're going to put you in a vocational track or an academic track. In other words, they're going to separate people, but they're going to decide that very early. First of all, they're going to monitor children from birth. So they have this component prenatal up through 3 years old.
There's similar language in the educational reform bill in Massachusetts. It talks about preschool programs, which could be construed as something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And students are no longer called students. They're called learners. Teachers are called facilitators.
That's right, yeah.
Classes are called cadres. Schools are called learning centers. And grades are called levels.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
What is the difference between that and what the Soviet Union has been doing since 1921, with the exception of the last couple of years?
Well, the difference is that our educators have computers. They're going to put everybody on the computer. You see, the Soviets didn't have computers back in those days. But our educators think that they're much smarter than the communists, that they can do it better, that they can create a totalitarianism that is so good, so unshakable, because they'll have all of this machinery, and they're going to, once you get on their computer, they have this database on you for life. In other words, they get you on, when you're in the womb, you're on the computer. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with abortion, because what if the mother decides she wants to kill the child? So are they going to let her kill the child, or are they going to say, well, that child's now enrolled in our learning center, you see,
I think
prematurely? It's going to be a rather interesting dilemma, isn't it?
Well, I think that question was probably handled in the very futuristic book by, I think, Aldous Huxley, The Brave New World.
Yes.
You know,
Well, go ahead. You tell me. What does he say there
well,
about that?
you know, about baby making machines, or how,
Oh, sure.
you know, just like in China, what is it? They only are allowed
One child.
one child, and then
Yeah.
and then that's it.
But you know, the interesting thing, Ted, is, you know, the homeschool movement is growing leaps and bounds.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, this coming weekend, the homeschoolers of Massachusetts are having their convention at the Framingham Tara, Sheraton Tara in Framingham. That's, you know, at the right off the Mass
Pike.
Turnpike this coming weekend. Now, I don't know when this show is being broadcast, Ted.
That's right. I got to keep that in mind, huh?
Yes.
Well,
it
for
might
my
be
personal
after. It
information.
might be before or after.
Okay.
But in any case, there's also another New England homeschool convention that's going to be held at the Sheraton Tara in Danvers in May. And I hope you inform your viewers of that, because that's going to be a very big one. It's called the New England Homeschool Convention. And it's going to be at the Danvers, right here in Danvers.
If I can interrupt you, I'm
Yeah.
going to give that information out. But if that educational reform bill passes, and if Billy Bulger does not stop it, and he's the only person who can stop it right now, then I think that homeschoolers will be in possible danger. And so I would urge anyone who's listening to me to call up Senator Bulger, if it's not too late, and ask them to vote against the education reform bill, which only is another tax and a loss of local control.
I know, but not only that, but we don't even know what's in this bill.
Right.
Nobody's read it. It hasn't been publicized by the newspapers. All we've heard about is that choice aspect of it, because Billy Bulger has pushed choice. But we don't know what else is in this thing. And since OBE is being pushed all over the country, in every state of the union, and they're doing it in a very sneaky, deceptive way, because they've aroused such parental opposition to this in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina.
Governor Casey of Pennsylvania is opposed to this.
Right. So it's something that citizens of Massachusetts should be aware of.
Let me ask you this, and I'm sure you might take it up in your newsletter on outcome-based education. I hope people do write in for your newsletter on this, but I don't think you've given out your address for that.
Okay, well, Ted, if any of your viewers would like to get a free sample copy of this newsletter, plus information about my books, they can do it. They can do so very easily by calling my publisher's number in Idaho, and of course there's a 2-hour difference there. But the number is 1-208-343-3790. That's 1-208-343-3790. If they call that number, they'll be able to, and say that they saw me on this program, they'll be able to get a free sample copy of this issue if they want the March 1993 issue.
Just to let you know, those residents in Danvers, the Danvers Town Library does carry the New American. Just go into the first floor, the magazine section, go in there. I think that they also have back issues on hand, and it might be interesting for you to get another perspective on the news, which is obviously slightly biased by the local media elite. And I had one question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a substitute teacher at Danvers High School, I didn't know anything about OBE, but I came across this memo, and it read like a UMass Amherst Radical Student Union Constitution, and it said, and this is from the old superintendent's pen.
Right,
is this a joke or whatever? I was very surprised. Appreciates the concept of global interdependence. Now, we both know what that means, but the average person walking down the street may not know. What does that mean?
Ted, what most people don't understand, that the OBE is part of this international movement to create world government. It's part of a worldwide scheme, and it's been fully documented that the world standards, the international standards, and the OBE standards are the same. They're exact, plus the America 2000. In other words, this thing has been planned for years now. What we're seeing are all of these pieces suddenly coming together And all of a sudden we see that we're approaching this world government at a almost breakneck speed. It's as if they are accelerating their plans because they realize that if they don't get this thing in place soon, it'll never happen. Because, as you know, the homeschool movement is growing, private schools are growing. People are so disgusted with public education that they're taking matters into their own hands. Parents are taking control of their children. But in OBE, the state owns the children. The state takes possession of the children, and the state interferes and intrudes in family life.
You're telling me that parental control and local community control is completely abolished by OBE?
It will be. It will be. And once they have this system in place, there's no telling what will happen.
So your sons and daughters will be forced to worship at the altar of George Orwell's 1984
That's right.
Big Brother.
The altar of Moloch.
Moloch, yes, a biblical character.
That's right. You will be forced to sacrifice your children to the state, you see, to the state, to world citizenship, to this world government, you see. And, of course, there will be no religion there. If you read any of these OBE documents, they talk about holistic education. They say we have to be concerned about the whole child, his emotional life, his spiritual life, his academic life, his political life, everything. They want to control every aspect of a child's upbringing. And you know what that amounts to? The most totalitarian system yet devised. I mean, it's just as bad as anything Hitler or Stalin or any of the worst of the Russian communist regimes have devised.
It's almost fascism, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, yes, sure, sure. It's a form of fascism because they're not confiscating all private property, but they're bringing private property under government regulation and control. Particularly with the passage of the wetlands bills, virtually 70% of all property in America is now under the control of the government.
Let me just say the Wetlands Acts and the sordid work of the Environmental Protection Agency under the Bush administration, and I'm sure that which will continue under the Clinton administration, is a device whereby they declare if there's just an itty bitty amount of moisture in the land, it is a federal wetlands area, and therefore the United States government has the right to steal private property without just compensation, which I believe is a violation of the Fifth Amendment.
Yes.
It's ridiculous, and I think just outcome-based education is a manifestation of this,
Well, it's part of the plan.
Yeah.
It's part of the plan. In other words, they've got to control people, and they're going to use the education system as the means of control, not only controlling what they can do, but controlling their upbringing, controlling their, the way they look at the world, their worldview. And so it's a very insidious development for a so-called free country. In other words, we're really no longer free. These are such blatant violations of everything we hold dear that you wonder how they've been able to get away with it. And the reason why is because they're not telling the public.
It's almost like the doctrine of gradualism, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. But I am convinced if the educational reform bill gets passed, along with, which is just basically a statewide OBE program, then you can just forget about public schools. I didn't want to have to. I mean, I know you're pretty much committed towards getting away from it.
Well, let me tell you this, Ted. I advise parents that under no circumstances should they put their child in a public school.
Okay.
Under no circumstance, particularly the first 3 grades, because that's when the greatest damage is done to the mind. You see, children, perfectly normal children, enter public school feeling very intelligent and very competent because they've taught themselves to speak their own language. I mean, every child does that. And yet, they go into public school, and after 3 to 6 months, they feel stupid. They can't learn. Something's happened. They can't learn to read. They're having problems. They can't learn to spell. They can't do arithmetic. And they begin to feel stupid. Now, here's a perfectly good self-teacher who taught himself to speak his own language, who feels very competent, very intelligent, and after 6 months in the first grade begins to feel that there's something wrong, that he's stupid, that the school is doing something to this child's brain. You see, these methods being used in the schools today to teach children
And in Danvers.
all over the country
Yeah.
were not devised by some little old ladies, you know, who had nothing better to do. These methods were devised by the world's leading psychologists who have studied the brain.
B.F. Skinner?
B.F. Skinner and others, even prior to that. But the world's leading psychologists, Edward L. Thorndike, James McKean Cattell, William Scott Gray, Arthur Gates, I can name them all if you want. But, and they're people that most people haven't heard of. But they're the ones who have created these methods that will turn a child's brain into macaroni in 6 months.
Young skulls full of mush, as
That's
Rush
right.
Limbaugh says.
And that's
Yeah.
what they do, because these methods were devised by the world's leading psychologists who know how the brain works. And so they turn these kids into dyslexics, functional illiterates, the learning disabled, the reading disabled, and now they have something called attention deficit disorder.
I was thinking about that one, yeah.
And you know, and they have a solution for that too. Just drug the kid. You know,
That's
give him
right.
Ritalin.
I've
you
seen
see.
that. It's just bad. That's bad news. Let me just say this. Obviously, this is a slap in the face to parental control, to parental freedom. It's a state-mandated religion that just wants to, you know, manipulate your political views and control you.
Right.
What would the Founding Fathers do in this situation, and what should we do as a society in conclusion?
Well, I don't think the Founding Fathers would even recognize this country as it has grown. I mean, they certainly would not recognize our morality. I mean, remember, these men were upstanding gentlemen who believed in God, who held very, very strong views on morality. And what you see today is a country that's under the hand of Satan. I mean, the Satanism throughout our society is so extensive now in entertainment, in education. It's all over the place, you see. So they would recognize that the satanic influences in this society are probably stronger than they've ever been in human civilization.
And what do we need to do about this?
Well, Ted, you know, the most important thing is first for parents to take control of their own children's education. And the homeschool movement, to my mind, is the most promising avenue of escape from totalitarianism, so to speak. So first of all, parents have to take control of their children's education, either school them at home or put them in a private school that they have confidence in. But as I said, under no circumstances should they put them in a public school, because that's the most dangerous place that you can put a child. The next thing is to become informed. Read magazines like The New American or get my newsletter to find out what is going on and not to be fooled by the politicians and by the educators who are trying to deceive the people. And of course then get involved politically, because let's face it, all of this is being done by politicians, you see.
And so I would like to salute your efforts.
Thank you.
Let's
Thank
not
you.
stop. Let's keep a positive image and attitude. You know, the Founding Fathers had a lot they had to go through to turn things around.
That's right.
And I think that we can do it with patriots
sure
such
we
as
will.
yourself.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Blumenfeld.
Thank you, Ted.
And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for watching the inaugural show of the Ted Maravillas America First Hour. And I would just like to thank the folks at Neshoba Cable for providing the equipment. And thank you to Andy Flatters, Jim Rose, Jim Matthews, everyone else that's back there. And I would just also like to thank you, the viewers of Danvers. And I just ask that you keep an open mind when you're reading your next newspaper or watching your next television report. May God bless you.
Still
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Maravilius America First show, and now your host, Ted Maravilius.
Maybe you want something to drink? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ted Maravilius, and welcome to the Ted Maravilius America First show. And this is my special guest, Angel, my Call Me Babe makeup artist dog. And Angel, do you have some words to say for us? Well, I think she has stage fright right now. So thank you for joining us, Angel. Bye. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Ted Maravilius America First show, and we're going to have Dr. Don Boyce, a former state rep from Indiana, on later. For the first segment of the show, I will give my monologue on the current issues, the review of the news. We'll have a 5-minute segment from Jim Morose, and again, we'll have the rest of the show, preferably 45 minutes with Dr. Don Boyce, so stay tuned. In the news today, I was noticing an event which really took me by surprise, and that was Congressman Peter Torkelson's switch, or at least his support for gays in the military, homosexuals in the military. Now, most Republicans in the Senate, including Bob Dole, oppose that, and it's traditionally been a subject that even Peter Torkelson, during his state rep days, opposed on particular House floor votes. And I just would like to show you the headlines. It shows Peter Torkelson with the headline, "Torkelson lifts ban on gays in the military." Now, it's bad enough that we have the Clinton administration with all the liberal agenda that he's trying to push through. But when we have Republicans like this, my question is, who needs Democrats like Barney Frank and Jerry Studs? I just don't know. And I think it's very unfortunate. I know there's a lot of Salem veterans that are extremely unhappy about this. I know I am. I think that it's just a sign of the times that politicians will sell their souls for the sake of political expediency. And I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's really somewhat of a disgrace to the Republican Party here in Massachusetts. And I hope and I pray that Peter Torkelson will come around on this issue, because it's really, really a very unfortunate set of circumstances. Just to give you some historical perspective on this issue, gays in the military, I'd like to read to you an actual letter at the founding of our country. And this happens to deal with George Washington, who was the commander-in-chief at the time of the Continental Armed Forces. And here's what George Washington did during a court-martial of a person in the Army that was accused of committing sodomy or homosexuality. And I quote from Howard Phillips's newsletter. "At a general court-martial whereof Colonel Tupper was president, Lieutenant Enslin of Colonel Malcolm's regiment tried for attempting to commit sodomy with John Mohort, a soldier. Secondly, for perjury and swearing to false accounts. Found guilty of the charges exhibited against him, being breaches of 5th Article 18th, section of the Articles of War, and do sentence him to be dismissed the service with infamy. His Excellency, the Commander-in-Chief, that is George Washington, approves the sentence, and with abhorrence and detestation of such infamous crimes, orders Lieutenant Enslin to be drummed out of camp tomorrow morning by all the drummers and fifers in the Army, never to return." Ladies and gentlemen, the ban on homosexuals in the military is as historic as the founding of this country. Indeed, the founder of this country, George Washington, as you saw right here, disapproved of sodomites in the Army. Now, this isn't a simple case of persecution, and let me just clarify my position. I do not hate anybody, including homosexuals, but there has to be some form of minimal standards within the Army if we're going to maintain discipline and order. And if this goes through, you can just kiss the military goodbye. As it is, Clinton's advocacy of massive defense cuts is going to destroy our readiness, again, as it is. If this goes through, it's all over. Along those lines, I would like to also say that the current U.S. Armed Forces Committee Chairman, Congressman Dellums, from California, Berkeley no less, is actually a sympathizer of Fidel Castro. In a letter written by one of his aides, he said of the dictator in Grenada, the communist dictator in Grenada back in 1983, when we invaded it. He said of Maurice Bishop, I know of no greater person, or his aides said that Congressman Dellon said that he had no more admiration for Maurice Bishop, no greater amount of admiration for Maurice Bishop other than Fidel Castro. Now, this is the type of person who is the head of our Armed Forces Committee. Now, what does that say about the situation and the status of our military preparedness? This is a guy, Ron Dellums, who, if he were to apply to a job from the civilian populace, say with the State Department, well, the Defense Department, any federal government, especially like the CIA or the FBI, will be turned down because he's a security risk. And here he is heading the armed forces. I think it's time for good people to start voting out those people who approve of not only homosexuals in the military, women in combat, also drastic cuts in the defense budget. We need to have a person who is willing to put America first. We need to stand behind the Marines, the people in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. We need to give them a bearing, a standard, so that they can follow, so that they can be supported in defending our country, not other countries. And again, that goes back to the America First philosophy. And let me just give you a quote, if I may, to further instruct you in terms of what the American First philosophy is. And again, I'm going to quote George Washington. And this was taken out of an article from Patrick Buchanan, that great American. And this is what George Washington said: "Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake. Since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. We have no right to be the world's policemen, and we should not be involved with police actions around the world which are totally inconsistent with the Constitution, which says that the armed forces can only be used to repel invasion and to repress insurrection. That's it. Anything outside of that is absolutely unconstitutional, and any use of forces by our government needs to be approved by Congress. Anything else is outside the realm of the Constitution, and that's what we need to get back to. So that's the America First philosophy. That's the issue with gays in the military. And again, I encourage you to write your congressman. I encourage you to take concerted political action and ask him, why is he turning our armed forces into a social breeding ground, into a bathhouse? It's really sad, and it's a sign of a decline of this country. Same thing happened to the Romans. Read about it in that famous book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, the author of which I forget. Now I'd like to turn to the Waco incident. Of course, that was in the news a few weeks ago. And that has, I think, also great ramifications for the future of this republic. And incidentally, we do live in a republic, not a democracy. And I say, let's keep it that way. Let me read to you quickly, if I may, a letter to the editor by Diana Forbes. It's in the Salem Evening News, and it's called "The Waco Holocaust Was the Fault of the U.S. Government." I am writing to express my extreme distress about what happened in Waco. I ought to have written it before, as it was clear the situation could only have a tragic outcome. Although in my wildest imaginations I would not have predicted infusions of tear gas or battering of any kind into a structure containing innocent children. The Holocaust that took place, whatever causes may be given out to the public, remains the responsibility of the U.S. government. The ATF and the FBI cannot be expected to make an impartial examination of the ruins they themselves have sponsored, and an independent commission must be appointed. The public is not stupid enough to say they asked for it about the victims of the senseless tragedy, whose correct name is murder, and I do agree parenthetically. Today, when this letter was written, Patriots' Day, we stopped burning people for their thought processes some time ago. Although this may seem a very minor point, I heard one of the FBI officials on the radio speak scathingly of David Koresh's 9th grade education, suggesting that he could not possibly come up with a worthy piece of writing. That is a slander on 9th graders, and it's also a slander on the people who, through no fault of their own, had to end their formal education at the 9th grade. I feel that there is a very real connection between the FBI agent's attitude and what subsequently happened. I wouldn't have given house room to a man like that, yet he has been in a position to help destroy someone else's habitation and their lives. Please do everything you can to see that the truth is made known and that some sort of post-mortem justice is done. I read that just to let you know that there are people out there, including myself, that feel that the actions in Waco, Texas are not only illegal, but evil in and of itself. Some, I don't know, is it 90 people died? Many of them children, dozens of children at the hands of the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, and the FBI. What was their crime, I ask you? This is a recent article in the Boston Herald. One of the kids who was in the compound wrote this. He said, "Dear Dad," or David Koresh, "I miss you. I am okay. I hope everybody will be okay." And here's a little picture, I believe, of herself. And her dad's dead now because the ATF said that there was supposed weapons violations. Supposed weapons violations justifies the murder of 90 innocent people? I don't think so. And let me tell you something, Janet Reno, who's the Attorney General of this country, if you're listening to me, you have blood on your hands, you're an accomplice to murder, and you have no respect for the Second Amendment or First Amendment rights of this country, and I think you should be tried for being an accomplice of murder. Let me just read to you the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Not only were David Koresh's rights to keep and bear arms infringed, but also his freedom of religion, which I don't agree with at all, but nevertheless he has the right to have those views. We're one step away from this country from having a totalitarian tyranny based on our federal government that will attack Bible-believing Christians under the guise of not obeying the state's wishes when it comes to education, i.e. the homeschoolers, supposed weapons violations like what happened to that guy out in Idaho. This guy sold an undercover ATF agent a shotgun which was like that much too short. It was entrapment. They tried to have him sell this to them. It was entrapment on the part of the FBI, and because the gun was this much too short, which should be legal to begin with, okay, they killed his wife and they killed his baby. And I ask you, do you want your tax dollars subsidizing a fascist Gestapo-type SS agency of the government called the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco? And you know something? Many police officers, innocent individuals, have been terrorized by that agency of the federal government of the United States. And I hope that the head of the ATF, again, is tried for murder, and that the ATF is abolished. It's unconstitutional to begin with, and this is one step closer to 1984. And I'm telling you, this is really true. Your freedoms are being encroached upon, and you need to do something about it soon. Okay? The country is only as good as its people, and you need to react. Okay. I just want to give a little tribute to those people who died at the hands of, in my opinion, a very evil government agency, the ATF and the FBI. Incidentally, William Sessions, who's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, an organization that was started as a Marxist, also is to blame for this tragedy, along with Bill Clinton, who again is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. This I give to the people who died in Waco, Texas. It's a quote from Douglas MacArthur. Give us the fortitude to endure the things which cannot be changed, and the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to know one from the other. Last, but by no means least, courage, moral courage, the courage of one's convictions, the courage to see things through. The world is in a constant conspiracy against the brave. It's the age-old struggle, the roar of the crowd on the one side, and the voice of your conscience on the other. Andrew Jackson, one man with courage makes a majority. I think we saw that down in Texas. I'll tell you, if you're a member of the ATF or the FBI, but especially the ATF, you think you're a patriot, you think wrong. And I have nothing but disdain for the entire agency, and I hope they abolish it tomorrow. And I'll tell you something, there's the grossest violation upon an American citizen or citizens that this country has ever witnessed, and there should be all heck breaking loose at the Congressional Switchboard with your opinions about the ATF, and I hope you make them known. I think that's, well, how much time do we have there, Jim? Okay, one more minute? Okay, we're going to close with this section on my monologue. I would just like to tell you viewers that we're going to be having Dr. Don Boyce from Indiana on in about 5 minutes, so stay tuned, have a little break, and get some ice cream, and come join us then. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jim Morose with the commentary for today. Following along with some of the comments that Ted made about David Koresh, I guess you could look at David Koresh took the most sacred book in the world and kind of perverted some of its believings and led a lot of people to believe what he believed. And in this republic that we live in, that's his constitutional right. And but yet the fact remains that he took basic truths from the Bible and kind of somewhat distorted them. And I look at it and I say to myself, is there any correlation between what David Koresh has done with the Bible as opposed to what our Congress and our elected leaders have done to the Constitution? I have a survey that was done by the Connecticut Mutual Life on American values, and they state that on some of these, on some of the moral issues that face the country today, that there seems to be a large disparity between what the general public, how the general public perceives these moral issues as opposed to our elected officials and then our supreme judicial system. On one specific moral issue, we'll take homosexuality. This survey states that the general public, out of the general public, 71% of the people in the general public believe homosexuality is wrong. And government leaders and officials believe that 42% of our leaders believe that it's wrong. And our judicial system, only 30% believe that homosexuality is wrong. Again, I ask, who's running our government? I believe the government is out of balance. We have three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And as we all know, our Congress is in gridlock because they don't have direction and they are too busy bouncing checks and bending to social pressures and social issues, which is not the intent of our Constitution. And legislative branch, which is the Congress, I mean our executive branch, the president, is busy appointing all his social engineers to positions which are going to further corrupt the Constitution as it was intended. And Supreme Court is now in the process of debating all these social issues because the legislative branch and the executive branch are so busy trying to understand what's going on, and they're the ones that are supposed to be writing the laws and protecting the government. The judiciary has, in effect, been running the country. Thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our final segment of the show. With us tonight, our guest, Dr. Don Boys. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you, Ted.
Dr. Boys is a former Republican state rep from Indiana and a former syndicated columnist for USA Today. Dr. Boys has also written many books. Among some of the titles: Liberalism, A Rope of Sand, A Time to Laugh, Is God a Right-Winger? Of course. Christian Resistance, An Idea Whose Time Has Come, again, Pioneers, Preachers, and Politicians, The Story of America, and I think the book you have in your hand, AIDS, Silent Killer. Dr. Boys has also written many articles, or several articles, in The Sword of the Lord, a Christian newspaper of which I do subscribe to. He has appeared also in various talk shows such as CBS Morning News, Crossfire, NBC Nightly News, The Sally Jesse Raphael Show, Morton Downey Jr. Show, and several other radio shows across the nation. Dr. Boys is also an evangelist, and he will be joining us this week, although it's not going to be this week when you see us, at the Peabody Tabernacle Baptist Church on Summer Street, downtown Peabody. He will be giving some messages from the Bible and just perspectives, I believe, on social issues as well. And I think it's on that latter part that I'd like to concentrate on today. This is sort of an open forum for a dissenting opinion from the average opinion that you see on TV on a day-to-day basis and on the news media, or in the news media. And I suppose that's my first question. I notice you're a former columnist for USA Today. What happened to make it former?
Well, first of all, I appreciated USA Today. I never agreed with them. I hardly ever agreed with them, but I appreciated the open door I had. I told them a couple years ago, I said, I think you all consider me your token fundamentalist. And so I was able to reach millions of people. But I became dissatisfied. They changed the format, and they seemed to take a few steps more to the left. And it seemed to become a paper, the mouthpiece for minorities, and minorities ought to have a mouthpiece, but not exclusively. And I challenged them to name, they would occasionally have a Christian conservative, such as John Lofton or Beverly LaHaye,
yes.
somebody like that, and myself, but really no outspoken Christian, no outspoken conservative. And I just got weary of the whole thing, and I decided I was going to be the one that quit them. And my contract came up every March the 15th, and I simply told them, save their money, I would not be sending it back.
Well, Dr. Boys, tell our viewers how pervasive is the bias towards the left in our media today? How extensive is it? And is it really true that they are really trying to formulate our opinions, and we're just not aware of it?
Well, I don't know that even needs to be discussed. Anybody who's halfway informed, ought to know that. That should be an obvious thing. One of the editorials just in the last few minutes documented the fact that the media people are far, far to the left of the average person on the street. They're out of step. And I believe the media have an agenda, and it's a leftist agenda. Now, I say the media, there are some exceptions. This, of course, is the media. Yeah. But, I have not been muzzled. In fact, I haven't been muzzled at all, but at times they will tell on a talk show, don't quote any Bible. And they've never told me that. They told Cal Thomas that on Nightline. But it's astounding, the unfairness. The old-time liberals, at least many of them were honest people, and they believed in fairness and equality and all. The modern liberals, I think, are the biggest hypocrites in America. And to make it worse, they're sanctimonious hypocrites. And they talk about how we Christians and conservatives trying to cram our ideas down the throats of people. That's an incredible statement. They're the ones that are doing that. It's as if when you become a Christian, you don't have a First Amendment right to espouse your position. And when I do a show on homosexuality, they try to present me as if I've got two heads. And I say, let me remind you people of something. That first of all, the position I take is the position that most of the American people take. And I want to remind you, this is the position that has been taken by all nations down through the centuries. And it's the position that all denominations have been taking down through the centuries until the last 15 years. And then even now, it's only a couple of fringe groups that are very pro-homosexual. And a couple of the groups are toying with it. But I want to remind you that half the states still say it's illegal to be a sodomite.
Dr. Boyce, Massachusetts has one of those sodomy laws. It's Chapter 272, Section 34. And everyone goes, oh, he can't say it's a blue law. I didn't write the law, but it's there.
Yes. It's
there. And until someone has the guts to put their name on a piece of bill to overturn it, it's still on the
yes.
law. And incidentally, the current state rep here in Danvers, sort of in relation to what you're talking about, actually submitted a bill, or tried to submit a bill, that would overturn Massachusetts blasphemy laws. Now, I understand it's a blue law, so-called, but the law itself prevented people, or would fine people for blaspheming the name of Jesus Christ. And yet, here she is, a professing Catholic, wanting to make it okay to blaspheme the name of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And she also was involved in legislation to overturn the sodomy laws, I believe, the fornication laws, the adultery laws. I mean, why can't we have some minimal form of decency in our government, the way that we've had all the way up until at least the 60s?
Yes.
Is that somehow evil, or is that necessary for the safety and the survival of our country?
Well, of course, the old saw is that you can't legislate morality, and people who make that statement are dumb as a box of rocks. The fact is, every law legislates morality. The question is it going to be your morality or mine,
yes.
or the leftists? And I'd rather it be mine. I'd rather it be that which is traditional down through the centuries. We turn our backs upon tradition and turn our backs upon biblical teaching and common sense at our own peril. And I know that just because we've believed something for 1,000 years doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It's never been right to mistreat blacks. Never been. In fact, you ought never not mistreat anybody. I frankly think the '64 Civil Rights Act went too far when it got into private property. But I can't believe anybody would justify mistreating people. But so just because something is old doesn't necessarily mean it's right. But I'm saying we ought to be very careful about turning our backs on that which has been held by sane, sensible people down through the centuries. And the sodomy laws, of course, are just one example.
Let me ask you, your book, AIDS Silent Killer, how does that relate to this discussion that we've been having right now, specifically our government's response to the AIDS issue? Maybe you could touch on AIDS and also gays in the military.
Yes.
Give us a brief description of these issues and what it means for the average American person.
Well, of course, I wish we had 3 or 4 hours, literally, because I've gone 3 hours on some talk shows. But I think the government has been totally irresponsible. I think the AMA has been totally irresponsible.
American Medical Association.
Yes. I think the FDA, Federal Drug Administration, I think the blood bank officials have been totally irresponsible. And I had to go into all this in the book, by the way. It's incredible what's happened. AIDS is the only politically protected disease in the history of mankind. And it's because of the clout of the homosexual lobby. I'm not interested in mistreating anybody, but it's a medical issue. It's a health issue, not a civil rights issue. And there are many things that are not known about this disease. They keep coming out with things. My book was first published in 1987, and the new edition is now out. And I mentioned in 1987 the danger from kissing. I was ridiculed on various talk shows and ridiculed by health officials in different states. Now the CDC admits, quote, that passionate kissing can be hazardous. Now what's happened? I said that in 1987. I said that next kiss could be the kiss of death. And I was ridiculed and said that I was fanning the flames of hysteria. But yet now the CDC says that passionate kissing can be hazardous. What's happened? What's changed? Nothing's changed except their opinion.
Dr. Boys, yeah, you're talking about the Center for Disease Control, which ostensibly is giving direction to the federal government's policy on the AIDS issue. And yet, these are the same people, I think, that said that, you know, you can't get AIDS in the blood supply or something like that.
Yes, they assured us. I have a lecture on 17 times federal health officials have been wrong about AIDS, and originally they told us you can't get AIDS from a blood transfusion. And when they said that, by the way, there was evidence from hemophiliacs that you could get AIDS in that way, in that direction. And now we know, of course, they were wrong. They said you could get AIDS from needle stick. Now we know, of course, they were wrong. They were wrong many different times.
I'd like to make a point. I have a personal dislike for mosquitoes. I do not like them. I think we should try to eliminate them from this state and from this town. I just don't like them. But tell me, if they can spread malaria, I believe hepatitis, and encephalitis, yes, why is it not possible it could spread HIV?
Well, of course, that question should be asked, but since 1981, the experts, and of course an expert is any person 100 miles from home with a briefcase, and the experts told us that mosquitoes and other insects don't even carry the virus. And they've been yelling that and telling anybody who would listen to them. And then the Pasteur Institute, that's the #1 place for AIDS research in the world. In fact, the discoverer of the AIDS virus heads up that organization. And they came out with a report saying that about 50 insects do, in fact, carry the virus. But they went on to add in their news release, however, humans don't have to worry about catching it from them. Now, let me remind your viewers that you and I are not protected from HIV from news releases by the CDC or the Pasteur Institute. But they assured us, okay, yes, mosquitoes do carry the virus, but you can't get it from them. But they're talking about biological transmission. They're not talking about mechanical transmission. And I've interviewed the Centers for Disease Control 5 different times, and I asked them about that possibility, and they said, well, we think that probably, they said, that mechanical transmission, that is where a mosquito would hit somebody infected and then come over and hit somebody who's not infected and pass the virus on. The mosquito would have to make many trips to get that job done. And of course, that was pure supposition because they don't know how much of the virus it takes to infect a person. And now it's believed that it's just a minuscule amount. So that's still up in the air. Uninformed people are still saying that mosquitoes and other insects don't carry the virus. And some of them are health officials, uninformed people, or dishonest people. But what is controversial is whether or not the virus can be passed on to us. And the jury's still out on that.
Yeah, I think the point is that what happened in my opinion, what happened in Waco, what happened in a lot of things like the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination, in my opinion, all of these cover-ups, I think every single American should take with a grain of salt that something so serious of an issue that's being perhaps confused by the federal government. I think you should just take everything that they say with a grain of salt, and I think we should just rely on some common sense for a change.
You know, I've had a couple friends of mine, highly intelligent people, who have made the statement, hey, Don, I don't have any reason not to believe my government officials. Those men have been living in caves. I mean, they're intelligent men, and yet they're talking like that. Have they forgotten the U-2 incident when Eisenhower said the government has a right to lie to the people? Have they forgotten Vietnam already? The controversial body counts? Have they forgotten Watergate, Iran-Contra affair? Have they forgotten the POW problem? It's incredible that any intelligent person would make such a statement. They think, well, just because government officials make a statement, it's true.
You know, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said that patriotism is, and this is a loose translation, was not defined as your obedience to your leader, but is defined as your obedience to a leader insofar as he is faithful to the Constitution of the United States
that's right.
and to the laws of the country. And if a person or an agency such as the CDC is lying about AIDS, they are really indirectly, at least, responsible for maybe a lot of deaths.
Yes.
And I think it's about time that we get out good information about the AIDS issue, AIDS silent killer, and perhaps you would give us an address if you want more information about issues.
If they'd like to have some free information or information about a lot of this, they can write P.O. Box 944, Ringgold, Georgia, R-I-N-G-G-O-L-D, Ringgold, Georgia, 30736.
Dr. Boyes, let's change gears now, and let's talk about another issue, namely that of Christian involvement in politics. There's two things I can't stand, a liberal Republican and a liberal Christian. Tell me, what are your views on Christians that don't want to have any responsibility in terms of who they vote for? They just vote for anyone that comes down the pike, or they just read the papers, the liberal newspapers, and say, well, you know, the Danvers Herald says I should vote for that person, so why? I'm not going to step on anybody's toes.
Yes.
And the pastors who say the same thing. What do you think about these Christians who are just selling their own heritage out?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, they're not very good Christians and not very good Americans, in my opinion. And I think that pastors who refuse to inform their people are sob sisters and cowards. And some of them are of my ilk. Some of them are friends of mine or acquaintances of mine. They're so concerned about their tax-exempt status, they're bowing down to what I call the Baal and surrendering their souls. And I'm talking about some of them are pastors of large churches, and they like their love affair with the world. They like having lunch with the mayor first Monday of every month, and they're not willing to come out against abortion and pornography and demand that some common sense prevail. And so they're not training their people. I'm not talking about brainwashing people. I'm talking about informing people. Originally in this state right here and in New England, people came to the church and they formed their opinions from the pulpit. They knew their pastor was the best educated man in town. He was also, at least usually, the most honest man in town. And while they didn't always accept his opinion, although they usually did, they listened to what he had to say, formed their opinions. Today they're not doing that because they've lost confidence many times in their pastor.
Right.
And of course, when Harvard went bad and Yale went bad, the preachers stopped holding up the Bible saying, "Thus saith the Lord," and they said, well, usually you can trust the Bible. And the churches got more corrupt, the pastors got more corrupt, and people then started turning to the growing newspapers and magazines and later radio and television. And so your viewers are making up their minds, usually from liberal magazines and liberal media, and not making up their minds from a conservative and informed pastor. And I think it's bad news.
Dr. Boyes, that's one of the best summations I've heard, because I intuitively have come to understand the greatest problem with our country is us. It's the Christians.
Yes, that's right.
It's the Christians. We've allowed this to happen. We've bought into the lie that somehow we're second-class citizens and that we ought not to raise a standard in politics. It's somehow intolerant, or it's against the First Amendment.
Yes.
Wasn't it George Washington who said it's impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible? Whoa, is George Washington, was he violating his own amendment that he helped create? I mean, these people at the Constitutional Convention, most of them had to actually swear an oath that they were actually Christians.
Yes,
I mean, that's how
right.
far it went.
That's right. That's
right.
right.
And we're not necessarily advocating that, but certainly a Christian or a conservative has a right to have their views aired.
Exactly right.
And I tell you, it's about time that we stand up for it. And yet, you're right. It's basically cowardice that these people are backing down. And it's not. I think they know intuitively that yes, that there should be a right and a wrong. That we should not encourage homosexuality. We should not encourage the slaughtering of babies, like supporting the Freedom of Choice Act, the way that Congressman Peter Torkelson does. We shouldn't be doing that. And we need to have preachers and pastors and even, priests, and even in the other religions, we need to have them stand up for what is right. Traditionally, murder and social ills such as homosexuality have always been discouraged by governments, at least most of them.
That's right.
And those that haven't have crumbled, Roman empires, Persians, what have you. And those people, especially in the pulpits, which are the people who are responsible for raising a standard. These people, again, used to be respected community leaders. Now these people are confusing their is it the pastorate, their flocks, or whatever you call them, parishioners.
Parishioners, that's right.
And it's a supreme act of cowardice because they're not holding true to what they profess to believe. And I consider that cowardice. Let me quote William Shakespeare. He said about cowardice, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once." I mean,
It's good.
We need to have people who have the guts to stand up for what is right. I know you have, and I am just so pleased that you've come here. I'm dying to read some of these books. I really think that we need people who are willing to take a stand. And in terms of taking a stand, why don't you recount for us and our viewers your experience as a state rep from Indiana, a conservative Republican who just was not willing to compromise. Tell us what happened. Tell me how about your election went, your future in politics, or your past in politics. Relate to us as a Bible-believing Christian and a conservative your experience in politics in Indiana.
Well, I was from southern suburbs of Indianapolis, and it was a very conservative district. And it was so conservative, it was the only district that went for Goldwater when everything else went against him in '64. So it was very conservative. And I was at the time running an administrator of a large Christian school in the city, and doing some writing and other things. And we had problems in the state with the state trying to enforce itself upon the Christian school movement. It's strange, and you've got it in this state, you have it all across America. The states can't even control the public schools. I mean, the kids are getting out, they're dumb as a box of rocks, generally. They can't read their diplomas. And this is, I mean, it's just a fact. And you saw what happened recently right here in Boston. And they can't even control the drugs, the violence and all, and yet they think they can control the Christian schools. I suggest that at least they wait until they get rid of the drugs from the schools, get rid of the incompetent teachers, make it to where it's at least safe for a kid to sit there in the classroom, and where, let's say the kid is at least able to read on a 5th grade level by the time he gets his diploma in the 12th grade. And then when they've done that, then we'll sit down and discuss and debate the constitutionality of the state interfering in Christian schools. You see, even if the states were doing a superb job in education, and not one is, even Massachusetts, not one state is doing a great job, but they've got the audacity to try to interfere in Christian schools where kids are reading in kindergarten. So I was running that large Christian school, and we had problems, and I was challenged to run for office. And I went down to the State House, signed my name with the Secretary of State as a candidate, and started twisting arms, raised $5,000 or $6,000 to pay for my campaign literature and commercials, and picked up about 125 people who believe what I believe. And we started knocking on doors and put out an attractive brochure. I made it extremely clear what I believed on gun control and pornography and death penalty and all the other hot issues, ERA and so forth. And when the votes were counted, I had won by 82 votes. That's why they call me Landslide Boys. And that was the primary. And then the general election, of course, Democrats didn't have a chance, and I won by overwhelming votes in the general election. And it was, again, it's unusual to win the first time, but the circumstances were just right. The man I ran against had been in office for 8 years. He was quite well-to-do and a personal friend of Governor Bowen, and nobody gave me a chance of winning. Nobody. And but even if I had lost, I would have challenged. I would have made him to work, and I would have pulled him a little to the center. He was a moderate. He wasn't a bad guy. but he was uninformed. And that's the way many people are. And in fact, even some conservatives who would really qualify as conservatives don't understand this issue, such as state intrusion into the Christian school movement, don't understand some of the problems with feminism, and don't understand some of the problems of gun control. You all have a dumb law right here in your state on gun control. It's not working. It's a farce. But some conservatives are uninformed about it, and they have to be educated. But at least if they're willing to be educated, then great. But Christians and Christian conservatives ought to run for office and to be supported by Christians. But most Christians are lazy. Most Christians are happy as long as they can go to church, and all that's good, going to church and praying and doing their thing. But they think that because they do that, they can't do this, that they can't go out and help a man get elected. You see, most of the people I speak to, I would say 98% of the people I speak to all the time, every night, they're fine people, decent people, but none of them have given a buck to help get anybody elected. And many of them are lazy and they're tight. And you said it earlier, we've got the mess in America today because of our Christians. I'm not for Christians, taking all their time. I think you can go overboard on something. But Christians ought to be running for office, but they don't want to run for office. You have to expose your financial soul, as you know. You're called a lot of things. I was called a bigot and a hater and a stormtrooper, and those are the good things I was called. And I'm not a hater. I love everybody.
I know the feeling. Believe me, especially
sure
here in the People's Republic of Massachusetts.
That's right.
Well, is there going to be judgment for these people? I mean, and from a theological perspective, I'm curious. I mean, I wondered, what does God think about this?
Yes. Well, I believe that I have a message that I preach about being faithful. We have to be faithful as a person, as a partner, as a parishioner, and as a patriot. And that I believe that Christians will give an account to God, how they vote. You suggested earlier that people are voting willy-nilly. Daddy voted this way, Granddaddy voted this way, and so I'm voting this way. That's foolishness. And there has been a change, and I think young people have, in the last 15, 20 years, have helped lead this change, where you vote for the person, not the party. And I've been saying that, and I said that for years. I said it when I was running for office. You send me a good Democrat, and I'll vote for him. If Larry McDonald hadn't been killed by the communists, I'd have voted for Larry McDonald for president.
Can I stop you? I've dedicated my entire career to Dr. Congressman Larry McDonald from Georgia, and
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned him. He was a patriot. He was on Korean Airline 007.
That's right.
And because he was head of the John Birch Society, a pro-American, pro-family organization, he had to be eliminated. And our government absolutely did nothing. It was such a shameful thing. And one of the very few things that I really was extremely saddened by the Reagan administration.
Yes.
It did nothing.
It's a disgrace.
Yeah.
And but McDonald was a Democrat, but yet I didn't know any place where I disagreed with him. So had he run for presidency, even though I was Republican, I would have voted for him. And I think people ought to be doing that. But if Christians would run for office themselves and challenge these liberals, you see, again, even if they don't win, they force them to spend more money, and they force the issues out. But and Christians also should vote correctly. By correctly, they ought to vote for principle, and they ought to help others get elected. And by help, I mean money as well as knocking on doors.
Absolutely. Okay. What are the issues, do you think, what are the major issues confronting America today that you feel that are worthy of our attention, that aren't necessarily being put in a proper perspective by the media today?
Well, of course, I feel strongly about homosexuals in the military. And again, I've been called a hater. I don't hate anybody. You know, it's amazing. When I do the talk shows, and I pointed out the viciousness, the hatred of my opponents. And in fact, on one of the network shows I did recently, I pointed it out, and the crowd applauded me because they could see the hatred coming out. You know, just because you have strong opinions doesn't mean you hate anybody. And again, liberals have never had the capacity to understand that you can detest what a person does without hating him. I mean, I've talked to numerous homosexuals. I just recently, while I've been up here on this trip, I preached for a pastor who was a homosexual when he was a youngster. When he was 11 years of age, he was seduced into homosexuality. And about half the cases, homosexuality, about this what happens. They're seduced by an older person. And here this pastor was, and they say, of course, you can't change. Well, of course you can change. You know, that's ridiculous. But I think it's insane that we're even considering putting homosexuals back in the military on an official basis. Of course, they've always been there. And this guy's whining is in the news today because he says, I don't have a job now. He was one of the top guns and pilots, and he came out on Nightline as a homosexual. And now he's whining because he doesn't have a job. Well, he's the one that came out, he's the one that admitted he was homosexual. And it's insane that we're saying that we're going to put homosexuals in close quarters with other men.
I agree with you 100%, but, well, let me ask you this, with gays in the military, with this possible passage of the Freedom of Choice Act, which would essentially codify into law the murdering of 1.6 million babies without anything the states or the people can do.
Yes.
And it would be for any reason. If these things pass, how long do we have as a country to survive? And people out there, I want you to realize the survival of this nation is at stake. It is not a bunch of hysterical talk. We are sliding down into tyranny.
Right.
How long do we have to stop this?
I don't know. I'm terribly concerned about many things. We just talked about a couple, the abortion problem and the homosexuals. Financially, we're in trouble. I mean, when you talk about $4 trillion, that's astronomical. And of course, with this national health insurance and all these other things coming, I'm extremely pessimistic. I'm not normally a pessimist. So we have Bosnia, another major problem. We have major problems today, and I don't know if we've got 10, 15 years.
But isn't it true, just like what happened with Israel, that if we just sat down and said enough is enough, to use common sense, voted for righteous people, people who had some standards, and if we in the church looked in ourselves and looked in and around us and started becoming more faithful to our Creator, that God would repent of whatever He would do to our land because of our wickedness?
I think if we genuinely repented, I spoke on this last night, if we genuinely repented of our personal sins and confessed it, forsook those sins as well, not just be sorry, but forsake those sins, then I believe we could possibly have more time. And of course, we don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But whenever it's happened down through the centuries, we've had revival, and there's been a resurgence of morality, decency, and so forth. But frankly, I'm not convinced that's going to happen.
Unfortunately, too. Not that I'm a massive premillennialist thinking that Jesus might come tomorrow, but I say let's do the right thing until He comes, right?
Yes,
Okay.
That's right.
And let me your final topic. We have a couple more minutes. I have no idea. I've never met you before. Okay, so this is not planned, and you may disagree. What are your feelings on the issue, or if this is a non-issue in your opinion, of America's supposed drive towards a one-world government?
Well, of course, I've been saying that down the road we're going to have not only a one-world church, one currency, but a one-world government, one court. And when I started saying that, and others started saying that 30 years ago, we were ridiculed. Who ever heard of such a thing? Nobody's ridiculing us now. I mean, we're on the way to a one-world order. And any politician who would put our Constitution under the UN Charter is a traitor, in my opinion, with a capital T. I'm not speaking symbolically, hyperbole. I'm speaking actually. They're traitors.
Dr. Boyes, the textbook definition, I don't know if it's in the Constitution or just the textbook definition of treason, is when you seek to overthrow the existing order of the government.
Yes.
The Constitution happens to be
Yes.
what this country is founded upon. It's the form of government that we have. It's a constitutional republic. If they want to replace it with a United Nations Charter, which is written by communists like Alger Hiss, it is treason. It is treason. When people talk about a new world order, it is treason. When people defend the primary one world government organization called the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, they're really advocating treason. And those people who are members of those organizations should get out of it. And those people should question their politicians. I heard Jack Kemp defend the Council on Foreign Relations a couple of months ago, and I was shocked. I was really saddened about that.
Well, Jack's he's a moderate, he's a good guy, but he's a moderate.
I didn't know that before.
Oh, yes. And no doubt we're going to hear more from him, of course, in '96. But I'm afraid we've got some bad problems on our hands when we have to face this decision about the New World Order. And I feel very pessimistic about that.
Dr. Boyes, I want to continue to hammer this point away because most people, well, as you know, the media, many of whom are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, they don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
People think it's a non-issue, oh, it'll never happen, or we'll somehow control the United Nations. It'll be like an American democracy for everybody. But in reality, it'll just be a one-person, one-country, one-vote situation, and just like what's happened since the founding, we'll get voted against 80% of the
That's
time.
right.
We'll be taxed at the international level. You think you have a bad time now with taxation, which is reaching the 40% level when you combine federal, state, local. How about an international tax from the United Nations? And if you disagree with it, what happens was, especially according to the 1963, I think, State Department document, Freedom from War, our armed forces will be subdued and be put into control under the United Nations One World Army, of which George Bush alluded to. He actually wanted us to start training him,
Yes.
I forget what the fort was. It was,
Yes.
I think it was in South Carolina. And what I'm trying to say is we're not going to have an armed forces to protect the American citizens from a one world government force from the United Nations. Isn't that's exactly what would happen
Yes.
if we let the United Nations have total power, right?
Yes. Honestly, it is insane or treason, insanity or treason, one or the other.
Are you familiar with what happened in Katanga, the former Belgian
Yes.
Congo, back in the 60s?
That's right.
The UN, that's one of the few instances where we can see what the UN did when it was given
That's
free
right.
reign into a country. It tried to install a socialist dictator named Patrice Lumumba, and then when a Christian conservative, pro-West, pro-American, I think his name is Moses Shambe,
Shambi.
he tried to say, no, I want to be the leader. You know, he had the people with him. He wanted to be the, a leader of a free nation. And we sent America under Dean Rusk, and Secretary of State, I believe, under the Kennedy administration, actually sent American supplies via the United Nations and under the United Nations control to go down to that station and assassinate free people. There's photographs of Belgian people just being slaughtered. And that's what would happen here if we allow one world government to reign. Any concluding remarks?
I'm thrilled that you're not politically correct.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boyes. And this is Ted Maravilius just reminding you, please don't believe everything that you read in the newspaper and everything that you see on Today. And I'd just like to finally conclude with saying, help fight organized crime, abolish the IRS. Thank you. God bless you.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a gold dry. The interest is up and the stock market's down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, a woman and the kids and the dogs and me. I got a shotgun, a rifle, and a four-wheel drive, and a country boy can survive. Country folks can survive. I can plow a field all day long. I can catch catfish from dusk till dawn. Make our own whiskey and our own smoke too. Ain't too many things these old boys can't do. We grow good old tomatoes and homemade wine, and country boy can survive. Country folks can survive. Because you can't starve us out and you can't make us run. Those Muslim old boys raised on shotguns. We say